Picture two women the same age, both European, both born in 1972. One grew up in a place where her mother worked full-time, where almost every mother did, where free nurseries opened before dawn, and the word for a stay-at-home mother was so rare it sounded foreign. The other grew up a few hundred miles west, in a country where a mother who went out to work could be called a raven mother, named after a bird people wrongly believed abandoned its chicks. Same continent, same year of birth. Opposite instructions about what a woman is for. And for the first 17 years of their lives, a wall ran between them. That is what almost every discussion of this generation gets wrong. It takes an American label, Gen X, and lays it flat across a continent that was, for the entire childhood of these women, split straight down the middle into two incompatible experiments about them. So one honest warning before anything else. There's no single psychology of Gen X women in Europe, and anyone who sells you one is selling you a horoscope. A woman who came of age in Krakow did not grow up in the same world as one in Lisbon or Manchester or Tallinn. What is actually interesting about this generation is not a shared personality. It is that they lived through more reorganization of what a woman was supposed to be than almost any cohort in modern European history. Start in the East, because it is the part Westerners understand least. Across the state socialist countries, women were pulled into paid work on a scale the West would not reach for decades. In East Germany, roughly half of university students were women, and most had no concept of being a housewife at all. Their mothers had worked. They worked. Childcare was a public service, not a private crisis. It would be easy to romanticize that, and it would be wrong. This was not feminism. It was emancipation decreed from above. For the collective, and it never renegotiated the home. Women carried a full job and then came back to almost all of the housework on top of it, while the men largely declined to move. The Eastern model handed women the workplace and left them the second shift inside a dictatorship. Crossed to the West, and in large parts of it, the ideal was still the man earning and the woman at home. In West Germany, the working mother carried a real social stigma, and a girl growing up there often absorbed the opposite lesson from her Eastern counterpart. That home was her proper place, and that ambition was slightly suspect. Two halves of one continent, teaching the same generation of girls contradictory things about their own worth. Then, right in the middle of their formation, the map tore up. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, these women were between about 9 and 24, old enough to remember the before, young enough to be reshaped by the after, and for women in the East, the change arrived with a twist. As the planned economies collapsed, women were very often pushed out of work first. The public childcare vanished, and in several countries a more traditional idea of womanhood came back. The promise of the West arrived bundled with a quiet instruction to go home. Here's the part worth staying with, because it is the real psychology. You might assume all of that childhood difference simply washed out after reunification. It did not. Researchers tracking the former divide found that East German women held on to their working patterns for decades after the country that produced them ceased to exist. More striking still, their norms proved contagious, pulling Western women toward more continuous work rather than the other way around. The childhood script outlived the entire political system that wrote it. That is the finding to carry out of this, because it is not really about Germany. It is about how astonishingly durable our earliest sense of our own role is. The rules you absorb before you're old enough to question them can survive the fall of a wall and the arrival of a completely different world. A great deal of what looks like free choice in midlife is a childhood instruction still quietly running. And this generation has arrived at midlife all at once, which means menopause often at the peak of a career, and in the middle of caring for children and aging parents at the same time. The temptation is to say this quietly wrecks women's working lives, and the honest research will not let me say it that cleanly. A careful review found that menopausal status on its own was not consistently linked to worse work outcomes. What predicted whether a woman struggled was the interaction, the workload, the support, the silence around it. It does not break a career on its own. It lands hard on a generation already carrying more than it lets on, which is the trap, gently. The instruction this whole generation absorbed East and West alike was to cope, adapt, and not make a fuss. In the world they grew up in, that was survival-grade wisdom. But it is the exact instinct now working against them, because a midlife this heavy cannot be carried in silence. The skill was never the silence. The skill was always the adaptation. And the most adaptive thing left to do is the one thing the upbringing made hardest. To say it out loud. That is the cue most people miss. If you're a Gen X woman in Europe, or you love one, which wall did she grow up on, and what did it teach her? Leave it in the comments. Subscribe to Psychology Q. And I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.